It was October 31st, 1993. The sidewalks of West Hollywood were crowded with stargazers and night owls drifting between neon lights. Outside the Viper Room, the nightclub part owned by Johnny Depp, a young man collapsed on the pavement, his body convulsing in front of a helpless crowd. Some thought it was a drunken stunt. Others whispered that it was an overdose. But when the news broke that the lifeless figure on the ground was none other than River Phoenix, Hollywood's golden boy, the world gasped in disbelief. River was only 23, the same age James Dean had been when he died in a car crash decades earlier. For an entire generation, Phoenix was more than just a movie star. He was a promise, a fragile dream wrapped in denim jackets and soulful eyes, the kind of actor who could make silence speak louder than words. But now, that promise lay shattered on the cold concrete of Sunset Boulevard, leaving behind a haunting question. How could Hollywood's brightest flame burn out so quickly? This wasn't just the death of a young actor. It was the end of an era, a moment when the world realized that fame could be as lethal as it was dazzling. And as the cameras flashed, capturing his final moments, River Phoenix was immortalized not for the roles he never got to play, but for the tragedy that made him an eternal icon. Long before Hollywood's flashing lights, River Jude Phoenix was born into a world far removed from the glitter of fame. He came into the world on August 23, 1970, in Madras, Oregon, to parents who were drifters, seekers, and dreamers. His mother, Arlen Dunetz, a secretary from the Bronx, and his father, John Lee Bottom, a carpenter with roots in California, had fled the ordinary to chase something they believed was bigger, a life of spiritual awakening, of freedom from society's traps. But what they found was not enlightenment. It was chaos. River's earliest memories were not of movie sets or red carpets, but of poverty. His family joined a religious sect called the Children of God, a movement that promised salvation but demanded obedience. They moved through Venezuela, Mexico, and Puerto Rico, often singing on street corners for money, relying on music and strangers' kindness to survive. For River, childhood was not school and playgrounds. It was hunger, instability, and the constant pressure to perform, to help feed his siblings. He was the eldest of 5: Rain, Joaquin, Liberty, and Summer. Each of them, like him, would eventually be thrown into Hollywood, but River carried the heaviest burden. His parents gave him a name that seemed prophetic. River, after the river of life. Jude, from the Beatles' song, Hey Jude. It was a name that spoke of idealism, of eternal flow, but it was also a weight. River was expected to shine, to be the proof that the family's wandering life had meaning. Even as a boy, he felt the responsibility of being the caretaker, the one who would rescue them all. When the family finally left the sect and returned to the United States, they were dirt poor. They changed their last name from Bottom to Phoenix, a symbolic rebirth, an attempt to rise from the ashes of a failed dream. The Phoenix children sang in parks and on sidewalks, their voices harmonizing to gather coins from tourists. River, with his angelic features and raw talent, stood out. He played guitar, sang folk songs, and carried an otherworldly charisma that made people stop and listen. He wasn't just a child. He was already an artist in the making, though he never asked for the stage. The stage was survival. By the time he was 10, River was spotted by talent scouts. The Phoenix family had moved to Los Angeles, their eyes set on Hollywood as the salvation that would finally deliver them from poverty. River, once just a boy with a guitar on a street corner, was now in commercials, then TV shows, and soon after, films. Unlike most child actors, however, River didn't play cute. He played real, with an intensity that startled directors and critics alike. There was something in his eyes that carried the weight of someone much older. But that depth came at a price. Childhood innocence had been stripped from him early. His family leaned on his earnings, relying on him to be the breadwinner before he even understood what fame meant. The pressure was unspoken but suffocating. River had to succeed, not just for himself, but for everyone who carried the Phoenix name. He was the engine pulling the entire family forward. Despite the burden, River loved acting because it gave him something he had never known before: a voice. On screen, he could express the silent storms inside him, the loneliness of his wandering childhood, the anger at hypocrisy, the yearning for something pure. In Stand By Me, 1986, his breakout role, River played Chris Chambers, a boy from a broken home, haunted by a reputation he couldn't escape. It wasn't just acting, it was confession. He was Chris Chambers. Critics noticed. Audiences noticed. Hollywood had found a new James Dean, a new Marlon Brando, but with something more delicate, more vulnerable. Yet beneath the applause was a boy still searching for belonging. River despised the artificiality of Hollywood's glitz. He refused roles that felt shallow, instead seeking characters who carried pain, conflict, and truth. He was vegetarian, an activist for animals and the environment, preaching compassion in an industry built on image. But even as he fought to live authentically, the shadows of his upbringing followed him. Poverty had left scars of insecurity. The sect had instilled confusion and mistrust, and the weight of family responsibility pressed down harder each year. River once confessed in an interview that he had no normal childhood. He said, "I had no toys. I had no friends. We were always moving, always struggling." That kind of honesty was rare in Hollywood. But it was also dangerous. The more he opened up, the more people saw not just the star, but the fragile human beneath. And in Hollywood, fragility could be fatal. What made River Phoenix magnetic was not just his looks or talent. It was the contradiction. A soul too old for his years, trapped in the body of a boy idolized by millions. He was both prophet and victim, a child forced to become an adult too soon. Every close friend, from Keanu Reeves to Samantha Mathis, would later describe the same thing. River seemed to carry an invisible weight, as if he knew his time was limited, as if he were sprinting through life before it ran out. In the 1980s, when Hollywood was dominated by glossy action heroes and macho superstars, River represented something different: truth. He was not muscles and explosions, he was emotion. Silence. The kind of actor who could break your heart with a glance. He became the voice of a generation that felt misunderstood, sensitive, searching for authenticity in a plastic world. But the origins of that truth were steeped in hardship. From cult communes to street corners, from hunger to Hollywood sets, River Phoenix's childhood was not a fairy tale. It was survival dressed as destiny, and in the paradox of his beginnings, we see the seeds of both his genius and his downfall. Because for River, there was never a clear line between performance and reality. Acting was not an escape. It was a continuation of the performance he had been forced to give since birth. Singing for coins, smiling through hunger, being the provider, the savior. Hollywood only gave him a bigger stage, but the script written long before he could choose remained the same. And that is the tragedy of his origins. The boy who was never allowed to be a boy became the man who could never stop pretending. By the mid-1980s, Hollywood was brimming with rising stars. But River Phoenix was different. He didn't just appear on the screen, he inhabited it. His breakthrough in Stand By Me, 1986, turned him into a cultural sensation almost overnight. Playing Chris Chambers, the boy from the wrong side of town who dreamed of being more, River infused the role with a haunting depth that critics called uncannily mature. Audiences saw not just a character, but the reflection of River himself a young soul grappling with burdens too heavy for his age. That role became a prophecy. River Phoenix wasn't simply an actor. He was already a symbol. Hollywood quickly embraced him as one of its brightest young talents. Casting directors and producers lined up, eager to turn his raw vulnerability into box office gold. Yet, River's choices were never predictable. He wasn't seduced by money or fame. He wanted truth. He famously turned down roles in superficial blockbusters, instead seeking scripts that spoke to the complexities of human emotion. It was a risky move in a business built on formulas, but River was determined not to be a product. He wanted to be an artist. After Stand By Me, he appeared in Running on Empty 1988, a powerful drama about a family on the run from the FBI. His performance as Danny Pope, a teenager torn between loyalty to his fugitive parents and his own dreams of independence, earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor at just 18 years old. That moment cemented River Phoenix as not just a teenage heartthrob, but a serious actor, someone with the potential to redefine Hollywood itself. Critics compared him to James Dean, Marlon Brando, and even Paul Newman. But River resisted those labels. He didn't want to be the next anyone. He wanted to be himself. At the height of his rising fame, River carried an aura of contradiction. He was shy and soft-spoken off-camera, often retreating into music, which was his first love. He played guitar with his band Aleka's Attic, dreaming of a career where he could combine activism, artistry, and authenticity. On set, however, he radiated intensity, drawing directors, co-stars, and audiences into his orbit. People described his presence as magnetic, an energy that couldn't be taught, only felt. The late 80s and early 90s became River's canvas. He starred in My Own Private Idaho 1991, directed by Gus Van Sant, a role that would become his most iconic. Playing a narcoleptic street hustler named Mike, River gave a performance of raw vulnerability, blurring the line between character and reality. He improvised entire scenes, including a tender, heartbreaking confession of love to Keanu Reeves's character that critics hailed as one of the greatest moments in modern cinema. It wasn't just acting, it was River's soul bleeding onto the screen. The film earned him the Volpe Cup for Best Actor at the Venice Film Festival, solidifying his status as the voice of a generation searching for authenticity. But with success came shadows. Hollywood adored River's beauty and talent, but River despised the artificial machine of celebrity. He gave interviews reluctantly, often shifting focus away from himself to speak about animal rights, the environment, or the hypocrisy of consumer culture. He lived in a modest house, wore thrift store clothes, and insisted on being vegan long before it was fashionable. He didn't want the spotlight, but he couldn't escape it. His angelic face, piercing eyes, and natural charisma made him the poster boy of a generation, whether he liked it or not. Behind the scenes, River struggled. Fame brought pressure. The Phoenix family still depended heavily on his income, and though he loved them deeply, he felt the strain of being their provider. Hollywood's demands only added to his exhaustion. Long shoots, relentless promotion, the constant expectation to deliver brilliance every time he stepped in front of the camera. Friends noticed he began to lean on alcohol and drugs, not as a means to party, but as a way to silence the storm inside. For someone who had grown up carrying the weight of an entire family, the pressure of carrying Hollywood's expectations became unbearable. And yet, despite the struggles, River's rise seemed unstoppable. He was cast in high-profile projects like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, 1989, where he played young Indiana Jones opposite Harrison Ford. That role introduced him to an even wider audience, proving that he could shine in blockbuster films while still carrying the depth of a true artist. He seemed to have everything: the critical acclaim, the fan devotion, the Hollywood power, but River was never fully at ease with the fame machine. He distrusted Hollywood's obsession with image and excess. He often said he wished he could disappear into music, touring with Aleka's Attic, singing about compassion and justice instead of performing for the red carpet. He was a reluctant star, one who wanted art without the circus that came with it. By the early 90s, River was at a crossroads. He had roles lined up in films that promised to elevate him even higher. Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ had considered him, and there were talks of him starring in Interview with the Vampire, a role that would eventually go to Brad Pitt after River's death. The future stretched before him, filled with possibilities, but the demons of his past whispered louder with each passing year. For all the acclaim, all the comparisons to legends, River Phoenix remained a boy from a wandering family who had never learned how to stop running. Hollywood gave him the stage, but it also amplified his pain, and as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows behind it. River's rise to stardom was meteoric, but it was never smooth. It was filled with contradictions. An actor who despised fame, a star who longed for anonymity, a young man adored by millions who never truly felt at home in the world he had conquered. And as the 1990s dawned, River Phoenix stood on the edge of something greater than himself, destined either to become Hollywood's greatest actor or to burn out before his time. No one knew yet which way the story would go, but River himself seemed to sense it. Friends recalled how he would often speak with a strange kind of urgency, as if time were always running out. He worked, he played music, he loved fiercely, but always with the intensity of someone who feared tomorrow might never come. And, in the end, that urgency became prophecy. By the early 1990s, River Phoenix was no longer just a promising actor. He was the crown jewel of young Hollywood. He had become the embodiment of a new kind of stardom, one that wasn't built on polished glamour or larger-than-life personas, but on vulnerability, truth, and an almost unbearable honesty. The world saw in River what it had not seen since James Dean, a performer who blurred the lines between acting and living, a figure who didn't just play roles, but seemed to bleed them. Every magazine cover screamed his name. From Vanity Fair to Rolling Stone, River was hailed as Hollywood's new rebel, the sensitive star, and even the future of cinema. His face, angelic yet troubled, was plastered across teenage bedrooms and industry journals alike. But what made him extraordinary was not just his looks, though they were striking. It was his refusal to play the Hollywood game. While others chased paychecks and blockbusters, River gravitated toward films with meaning, even if they weren't commercially safe. At 21, River delivered what many consider his magnum opus in My Own Private Idaho. As Mike Waters, the narcoleptic street hustler searching for love and identity, River disappeared completely into character. His improvisation during the campfire confession scene, where Mike admits his love for his best friend, was not just acting. It was a moment of raw truth that left audiences breathless. The film became a cult classic, and critics hailed his performance as one of the greatest of his generation. For River, the role wasn't just about cinema. It was about giving voice to outsiders, to the marginalized, to the people society chose not to see. Hollywood could not ignore him anymore. Directors like Sidney Lumet, Peter Weir, and Gus Van Sant sought him out. Martin Scorsese reportedly admired his ability to inhabit a character's inner world. He had the rare combination of critical respect and fan devotion, a balance most actors could never achieve. Even Harrison Ford, who worked with him in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, remarked that River had the makings of an actor who could redefine the future of film. But success came with a shadow. The more the world praised him, the more River withdrew. He hated being idolized. He once said, "I don't want to be a star. I want to be a human being." Yet, the machinery of Hollywood wouldn't let him. Studios branded him as the sensitive heartthrob, the new James Dean, the soul of a generation. Teenage fans screamed his name at premieres, while critics dissected every movement of his face. To River, it felt like a cage lined with gold. Still, in those peak years, River wielded his fame with a kind of grace. He used interviews to speak about animal rights, environmental issues, and veganism long before those topics became mainstream. He wanted his platform to mean something, to extend beyond red carpets and box office charts. In his downtime, he poured his heart into his band, Aleka's Attic, hoping music would one day allow him to step away from acting and live on his own terms. He dreamed of a future where he could blend art, activism, and authenticity into a single life. But Hollywood isn't kind to dreamers. Behind the curtain, the industry demanded more roles, more appearances, more brilliance. Friends began to notice River's exhaustion. His schedule was punishing. His family, still dependent on his income, unintentionally placed even greater pressure on him. He longed for freedom, yet the contracts and expectations pulled him deeper into the machine he despised. Despite the inner turmoil, River's career continued to soar. He starred in Running on Empty, Sneakers, and Dogfight, each role showcasing his versatility. He could shift from fragile vulnerability to quiet strength with a single look. Critics marveled at how he carried the emotional weight of characters decades older than himself. To many, River was not just an actor, he was a generational voice. But what made River's peak so haunting was the sense of fragility woven into his success. Unlike other stars of the era, Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, or Keanu Reeves, River seemed almost allergic to fame. He wore it like an ill-fitting costume, something that itched against his skin. He gave Hollywood its brilliance, but resented the price it demanded. And deep down, everyone around him could see it. By 1992, River was at the very top of his game. He was courted for blockbuster roles, respected by indie directors, and adored by millions. The New York Times called him the most gifted actor of his generation. Studios wanted him for leading man roles that could have made him one of the most bankable stars of the decade. Yet River hesitated. He didn't want to be the next box office king. He wanted to be an artist. That constant push and pull between commerce and integrity, between fame and anonymity, became the central conflict of his life. During this period, River's close circle friends like Keanu Reeves, Samantha Mathis, and his siblings noticed his growing restlessness. He began experimenting with drugs, not in the hedonistic spirit that fueled much of Hollywood, but as a way to cope with his anxiety, his insomnia, his fear of failing both his family and his audience. What the world saw as peak success was, for River, a balancing act on the edge of collapse. And yet, when he stepped in front of a camera, none of that showed. He was luminous, magnetic, almost transcendent. His eyes carried secrets. His body carried vulnerability. His voice carried a weight beyond his years. He had become not just a Hollywood star, but an icon, a symbol of truth in an industry built on illusion. At the peak of his fame, River Phoenix stood as both Hollywood's brightest hope and its most tragic omen. He was proof that talent could still break through in a world of franchises and formulas. But he was also a reminder of how merciless that world could be. Every smile, every role, every interview carried an undertone of fragility, as if everyone, perhaps even River himself, knew that his story could not last forever. In those fleeting years, River achieved what most actors spend a lifetime chasing: immortality. Not through the sheer number of films he made, but through the depth he brought to every performance. He gave audiences something rare himself, and in doing so, he etched his name not just into Hollywood history, but into the collective memory of an entire generation. But the higher he climbed, the thinner the air became. And in the shadows of his success, The storm that would end it all was already gathering. At the very moment, River Phoenix seemed untouchable when critics hailed him as the most gifted actor of his generation. And fans adored his every move. The cracks beneath the surface began to spread. Hollywood had crowned him its sensitive prince, but behind closed doors, River was fighting a battle no one could see. The world saw his luminous smile, his soulful eyes, his unwavering activism, but River was haunted by the scars of his nomadic childhood, by the pressures of being his family's provider, and by the relentless demands of Hollywood. He carried those burdens quietly, rarely voicing the weight they pressed on his shoulders. But the pressure had to escape somewhere, and it did, through the substances he swore he would never need. For years, River had cultivated an image of purity. He was vegan before it was fashionable, refusing to wear leather or harm animals. He often spoke about spirituality, about the need to care for the earth. In interviews, he came across as gentle, almost angelic, with a sincerity that set him apart from Hollywood's cynicism. To his fans, he was not just an actor, but a beacon of integrity, someone who lived the values he preached. But that image masked a growing conflict. River despised being commodified, treated as an idol rather than a human. The studios pushed him toward leading man roles, eager to mold him into the next Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt. He resisted, craving authenticity, gravitating toward darker, riskier roles. Yet, even when he succeeded in staying true to his art, the pressure didn't vanish. It grew heavier. Friends began to notice changes. On sets, River sometimes seemed distracted, exhausted, his once bright energy dimming. He had always been shy and introverted, but now he appeared withdrawn, distant, as if carrying an invisible storm. Behind the curtain, River had begun experimenting with drugs, not as a party accessory, but as a desperate attempt to numb the chaos inside. The irony was painful. River Phoenix, the actor who symbolized sensitivity, honesty, and light, was quietly being consumed by Hollywood's darkest shadows. By 1993, River's drug use had escalated beyond whispers. Friends tried to intervene, some urging him to step away from the industry altogether. His band, Aleka's Attic, had become his sanctuary. But even there, the chaos seeped in. The music he wrote was filled with melancholy and yearning, a cry for freedom from the machine he could not escape. Samantha Mathis, his girlfriend at the time, would later describe him as torn apart by two worlds, the boy who wanted to live authentically and the star who could never escape the spotlight. One of River's darkest battles came with the role he never got to play. He had been cast in Neil Jordan's Interview with the Vampire, alongside Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, a film destined to be one of the decade's most iconic. But River never made it to the set. His death forced the role to be recast, a haunting reminder of how close he had come to cementing himself at the very top of Hollywood. Brad Pitt later admitted that stepping into the role felt like inheriting a ghost, a role meant for a friend who never had the chance to fulfill it. For River, the collapse came suddenly, but not unexpectedly. On October 30, 1993, he arrived at the Viper Room, a nightclub part-owned by Johnny Depp, with his girlfriend Samantha Mathis and his siblings Joaquin and Rain. The club was packed with Hollywood insiders, a place where stars mingled with shadows, where the night often blurred into indulgence. River was supposed to perform on stage with a band that night, but he never made it. Witnesses recall him looking pale, fragile, his body already worn down from weeks of exhaustion and excess. Inside, he consumed a deadly mixture speedball, a lethal combination of cocaine and heroin. By the time he stumbled outside, the world around him spun into chaos. He collapsed on the sidewalk, convulsing violently, as his brother Joaquin called 911 in a frantic, heartbreaking plea. Samantha wept, trying to keep him alive. Strangers gathered, watching in horror. River Phoenix, Hollywood's golden boy, was dying in the gutter beneath neon lights. The ambulance arrived too late. At 1:51 a.m. on Halloween morning, River Phoenix was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was 23 years old. The scandal was immediate, and the fallout was merciless. The press painted the tragedy in lurid detail. The drugs, the convulsions, the final collapse outside a nightclub owned by one of Hollywood's biggest names. Headlines screamed his death across the globe, reducing a life of artistry, activism, and vulnerability to a cautionary tale of excess. Overnight, River Phoenix became another tragic Hollywood cliché, the star who flew too close to the sun and burned out. But those who knew him resisted that narrative. His family, devastated, withdrew from public view. Joaquin, then just 19, was thrust into the spotlight after his frantic 911 call was broadcast on television. Elizabeth Taylor, Harrison Ford, and countless others in the industry mourned him, remembering not the drugs or the scandal, but the brilliance of a boy who had given everything to his art. Still, the collapse of River Phoenix left a scar on Hollywood. He had been the hope of a generation, a new kind of star who could bridge the gap between art and authenticity. His death wasn't just the loss of a young actor. It was a brutal reminder of the cost of fame. Hollywood had consumed him, just as it had consumed so many before. For weeks, the industry reeled. His unfinished projects, his abandoned band, his unfulfilled potential, all became relics of what might have been. Fans left flowers outside the Viper Room, turning the sidewalk into a shrine. Young actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, who had been waiting in the wings, stepped forward, inheriting the mantle River left behind. But none could replace him. River Phoenix wasn't just another actor. He was a symbol of fragility, of the dangerous collision between innocence and fame. In the end, the dark side of River's life wasn't a scandal, it was a tragedy. A sensitive soul, forced to grow up too fast, crushed beneath expectations too heavy to carry. His collapse wasn't the result of reckless indulgence, it was the final act of a boy who had been performing since the day he was born. And as Hollywood moved forward, the image of River Phoenix collapsing outside a nightclub, his life extinguished before it could truly begin, remained one of its most haunting ghosts. The death of River Phoenix did not end on the sidewalk outside the Viper Room. It rippled outward, leaving shockwaves that tore through Hollywood, his family, and an entire generation of fans who had believed in him. The aftermath was not just about mourning, it was about reckoning with what his loss meant. In the hours after his death, confusion reigned. Journalists scrambled to confirm details, while the Phoenix family retreated in grief. His younger brother, Joaquin, had made the now infamous 911 call, a recording so desperate and raw that it was broadcast by news outlets across the world. In it, the 19-year-old Joaquin pleaded with paramedics to save his brother, his voice cracking in horror. That single phone call immortalized the tragedy, forcing Joaquin into an unwanted spotlight he hadn't yet chosen. For years, he would be haunted not only by his brother's death, but by the violation of his private pain turned into public spectacle. For the Phoenix family, River's death was a devastating rupture. They had always been close, bound by their unconventional childhood and their collective survival in the wilderness of Hollywood. Now, without River the eldest, the protector, the provider, they were adrift. Rain, liberty, and summer struggled to find their footing, while Joaquin turned inward, channeling his grief into the acting career he would later build. But in 1993, the wound was still open. The Phoenix children had lost not only a brother, but the person who had carried them all through poverty, cult life, and the unsteady transition into Hollywood. Hollywood, too, staggered under the weight of River's death. He had not been another star caught in the cycle of indulgence. He had been the promise of something different, a vision of what cinema could be if it returned to truth. Critics mourned the loss of his artistry. Gus Van Sant, who had directed him in My Own Private Idaho, admitted that the film could never have existed without Rivers' improvisational genius. Harrison Ford, who had played opposite him in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, described him as a pure spirit. And Keanu Reeves, his closest friend, withdrew in grief, devastated by the loss of the person who had been like a brother to him. But while friends and colleagues remembered River with reverence, the tabloids feasted on the scandal. Headlines screamed about heroin, cocaine, speedballs, and the shocking collapse of a Hollywood angel. The image of River convulsing on the sidewalk became one of Hollywood's darkest symbols. For an industry already notorious for chewing up young talent, his death was confirmation of the machine's brutality. Yet, as often happens, the nuance was lost. Rivers' complexity, his activism, his sensitivity, his quiet rebellion against fame was reduced to a cautionary tale about drugs. The impact on Hollywood was more than emotional. Studios that had cast River in upcoming films scrambled to adjust. The role in Interview with the Vampire that he was meant to play was recast with Christian Slater, who later donated his salary to EarthSave, an environmental group River had supported. It was a small gesture, but one that underscored how deeply River's values continued to resonate even in his absence. Among fans, River's death was met with disbelief. Vigils sprang up outside the Viper Room, the sidewalk covered in flowers, candles, and handwritten letters. Teenagers who had seen themselves in his sensitivity wept as though they had lost a friend. For many, River wasn't just a star. He was proof that someone could be vulnerable and still be strong. That sensitivity wasn't weakness, but power. His death felt like a betrayal not by him, but by the world that had crushed him. And then there was the matter of legacy. River Phoenix did not leave behind dozens of films. His body of work was small, almost startlingly so for someone with his level of fame. Yet, within that small filmography lay performances so powerful they eclipsed entire careers. Stand By Me, Running on Empty, My Own Private Idaho, each role carried the weight of authenticity, each one a glimpse into the soul of a young man who gave all of himself to his craft. Critics began to refer to his career as the longest suicide in Hollywood history, not in cruelty, but in acknowledgement of the slow, inevitable self-destruction that had shadowed him since childhood. For Joaquin Phoenix, River's death became both wound and catalyst. In the years that followed, Joaquin struggled with grief, disappearing from the public eye, only to re-emerge with performances that carried the same intensity River had once embodied. Films like Gladiator and Walk the Line bore the mark of that inheritance, Joaquin channeling the same vulnerability, the same storm, that had defined his brother. In interviews, Joaquin rarely spoke of River, but when he did, his words carried a weight that revealed the depth of the loss. He once said, "River was the most important person in my life. He taught me how to act, but more than that, he taught me how to feel." In the years immediately after his death, River's absence became a presence. Hollywood entered a new era dominated by faces like Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, actors who, in some ways, inherited the roles and opportunities that had once been River's. Yet even as these new stars rose, River's ghost lingered. Directors continued to speak of him as the "what if" of cinema, the actor who could have redefined a generation had he lived. Fans, too, clung to his memory, passing VHS tapes and posters, keeping his legend alive. The Viper Room itself became a grim landmark. For years, people gathered outside its doors on Halloween night, lighting candles and whispering prayers. The sidewalk where River had collapsed became hallowed ground, a reminder of both Hollywood's allure and its cruelty. Perhaps the deepest wound was the sense of unfinishedness. River Phoenix was not a star who had faded after decades of work. He was a comet, burning brightly and gone too soon. Every film he left behind became a relic, a piece of an incomplete story. And because of that, his legacy was forever tinged with longing, not just for who he was, but for who he might have become. For Hollywood, the lesson was brutal but fleeting. Studios continued to exploit young talent, continued to push stars beyond their limits. Yet Rivers' story lingered in the conscience of those who had seen him, who had known him. He became a symbol of fragility, of the cost of pushing too hard, of the danger of confusing talent with invincibility. In the end, the aftermath of River Phoenix's death was not just about loss. It was about reflection on fame, on family, on the fine line between brilliance and destruction. His wounds became Hollywood's wounds, etched into its history as both warning and lament. And even as the years passed, the image of River Phoenix, the boy with the haunted eyes, the actor who made silence speak, remained untouchable. Forever young, forever fragile, forever incomplete. 3 decades have passed since River Phoenix fell on that sidewalk outside the Viper Room, and yet his presence lingers as though he never left. Time has turned him into more than just an actor. He has become an icon, a ghostly reminder of both Hollywood's brilliance and its brutality. His legacy is not measured in the number of films he made, but in the intensity of the lives he touched and in the eternal question of what could have been. For many, River represents the lost future of American cinema. His performances hinted at an evolution of acting that was rawer, more truthful, more vulnerable than what Hollywood was used to. In Running on Empty, audiences saw the soul of a young man torn between duty and selfhood. In My Own Private Idaho, they saw compassion, loneliness, and longing, delivered with a bravery that few actors of his time dared to explore. These were not just roles, they were revelations. Each film seemed to whisper that River was not just performing, he was offering pieces of himself. And in those pieces, audiences saw their own fragility reflected back. What makes River's legacy so haunting is its incompleteness. He never lived to transition into adult roles that might have shown us the full range of his artistry. Would he have become a Scorsese regular? Would he have collaborated with visionary directors like Paul Thomas Anderson or Quentin Tarantino? Would he have rivaled Leonardo DiCaprio or surpassed him? These questions remain unanswered, and it is in that silence that River's myth continues to grow. His influence, however, is undeniable. Actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, Jared Leto, and Heath Ledger have all cited River as an inspiration. DiCaprio, who rose to prominence in the years following River's death, was often described as filling the space River left behind. Heath Ledger, another actor whose life ended tragically young, carried the same intensity, the same vulnerability that River embodied. In this way, River's artistry did not die with him. It echoed forward, shaping the next generation of performers. Beyond Hollywood, River's values left their own mark. Long before environmentalism and veganism became mainstream, River was their outspoken champion. He donated to animal rights groups, gave interviews about compassion, and used his platform to fight for a kinder world. His friends often remembered how he refused to compromise his beliefs, even when it made him seem strange or difficult to others in the industry. In hindsight, his activism feels prophetic. River was speaking the language of a future world that had not yet arrived. Yet, for all the admiration, River's legacy is bittersweet. He is celebrated, yes, but also mourned as a symbol of fragility. Fans still gather every year on Halloween outside the Viper Room, leaving candles and flowers, turning the spot into a shrine. Online forums buzz with theories, stories, and personal memories. For those who grew up with him, River is forever 23, frozen in youth. For younger generations discovering his films today, He is the eternal outsider, the boy who could never grow old, the rebel whose rebellion was simply being real. His family, too, carries his memory quietly. Joaquin Phoenix rarely speaks of River, but when he does, his words reveal the depth of the wound. In his Oscar acceptance speech for Joker in 2020, Joaquin quoted a lyric River had written, "Run to the rescue with love, and peace will follow." In that moment, the entire world remembered River Phoenix not as a scandal, not as a cautionary tale, but as a poet, a dreamer, a soul who believed in love above all else. And so, River's story leaves us with questions that refuse to be answered. Was his death inevitable? The culmination of a life burdened from childhood? Could he have survived if Hollywood had treated him with more care? If fame had been less suffocating? Or was River always destined to be a comet, brilliant, brief, unforgettable? Perhaps the real tragedy of River Phoenix is not simply that he died young, but that his life continues to remind us of the fragility within all of us. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That sensitivity, though beautiful, can be unbearable. That fame, though dazzling, can be destructive. And that genius, though radiant, is often fragile. But in that fragility lies River's enduring gift. He showed us that masculinity could be tender, that strength could exist in vulnerability, that truth mattered more than artifice. He lived by those values, even as they made his journey more difficult. And though his life ended in chaos, his legacy lives in the honesty he left behind on screen. River Phoenix was called the boy who never grew up, but perhaps it is more accurate to call him the boy who showed us what it meant to feel. His films remain as emotional touchstones, timeless in their ability to pierce the heart. His story, tragic as it is, continues to inspire not because of how he died, but because of how he lived with sincerity, with passion, with a refusal to compromise. As the credits of his life rolled too soon, River left behind a question mark rather than a period. That question, what might he have become, keeps his name alive. In Hollywood's Hall of Legends, his star shines not for its longevity, but for its brilliance, short-lived yet eternal. And maybe, in the end, that is River Phoenix's true legacy. Not answers, but questions. Not a complete story, but a fragment of one. A reminder that sometimes the brightest lights are not meant to last, but to illuminate, however briefly, the darkness around us. River Phoenix will forever be 23, forever fragile, forever luminous, and forever asking us to wonder, what if?